The AEW all-out brawl between CM Punk, Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks is still the biggest story in All Elite Wrestling, and we have today a full timeline of events leading up to, during and after this big brawl, the futures of CM Punk, Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, what it means going forward, and what is the latest news about the third-party investigation. We have a huge in-depth look at all of it in today's AEW news video. Plus, Chris Jericho is going to compete for the Ring of Honor World Championship next week at Grand Slam edition of Dynamite. Eddie Kingston is set to finally face off against Sammy Guevara. Sting and Darby Allin have their matches set for next week in Arthur Ashe Stadium. There is going to be a big golden ticket battle royal, and Tony Khan says pro wrestling is hot. Do you agree? All this and more in today's AEW news. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of All Elite Wrestling. So let's get straight into what we are calling the timeline. The timeline of events that happened with this big all-out brawl. Now, it must be said, huge hat tip here to Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful Select, because he has published this huge, absolutely massive, in-depth report of what he knows, kind of compiling all of these other reports, other stories, other eyewitness accounts of what happened between the Young Bucks, CM Punk and Kenny Omega in the post-all-out brawl. Obviously, CM Punk with his comments in the media scrum leading to this confrontation inside his locker room involving Punk, AEW producer and longtime friend of Punk, Ace Steel, Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, hair being pulled, biting, black eyes, chairs being thrown, punches being thrown. What we're going to do today is try and just get on the table every single thing we know up to this point. So huge hat tip to Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful Select, who is really sort of, you know, the real basis of this, of the start of this video and the majority of today's video. So huge shout out to him, huge hat tip to him. Be sure to subscribe to Fightful Select. It's only $5 a month. So let's get into this, okay? So CM Punk, right? It starts off with CM Punk. CM Punk garnered an incredible amount of heat for his comments at the AEW All Out post-show scrum. Now, it must be said, of course, prior to that, things had been simmering for a really long time about CM Punk, of course, his prior relationship with Scott Colton, Colt Cabana, rumors that he wanted Colt Cabana out the company, which he denies. Obviously, there were reports being written about that. Things had been simmering in AEW for a long time. Hangman Page going off script or going into business for himself on episodes of Dynamite during his feud with CM Punk. CM Punk then retaliating, going into business for himself on subsequent editions of Dynamite. Things had been simmering. Now, as I mentioned, Punk garnered an incredible amount of heat for his comments at the all-out post-show scrum, which ended up leading to a fight. Now, even before that fight, talent from AEW had actually been in contact with Fightful, according to Sean Ross Sapp, expressing their displeasure with Punk. Now, during the post-show media scrum, Punk ran down his history and falling out with Scott Colton, also known as Colt Cabana, and he proceeded to target the likes of Hangman Page, the executive vice president of All Elite Wrestling, that being Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks. Punk said that Hangman Page went into business for himself and almost compromised a huge AEW gate, as he mentioned the first ever $1 million gate in the company's history. He then said, in addition to that, the executive vice president's leaked information, specifically regarding he and Scott Colton. Before the scrum ended, there were AEW talent in disbelief of the conduct that was being presented in front of the assembled media by Punk. Now, Punk, at the time the AEW World Champion, was clearly upset over reports earlier this year that AEW talent believed he was the reason that Colt Cabana originally wasn't going to have his contract extended or renewed by Tony Khan. However, Khan then gave Cabana a full-time Ring of Honor contract. Cabana is now full-time on an ROH brand that doesn't really exist at the moment. It doesn't have a TV deal. It's not doing really touring events. It's done a couple of pay-per-views, that's it. And it's currently not on the road with AEW. He's effectively being paid to stay at home during this time period whilst AEW and Tony Khan figures out what's going on with Ring of Honor. Now, CM Punk told Nick Hausman of Wrestling Inc. that it had been nearly a decade since he has had a relationship with Scott Colton, and he thinks it's a shame that he has to address this publicly. He said, quote, and it's a long quote here, but it's worth again as we do this timeline to express all of it. Quote, if you fancy yourself a journalist, even if it's for the silly world of professional wrestling, and you have journalist integrity, people who report things, mostly that are bullshit and slanderous lies against myself, if you are friends with somebody, you blew my spot. If you're not friends with him, I apologize, Punk said. You should probably disclose who you're friends with. I haven't had anything to do with Scott Colton in almost a decade. Probably wanted nothing to do with him even longer than that. It's effing unfortunate that I have to come up here and this is on when I'm on my time, and this is an effing business. Why I'm a grown-ass adult man and I decide to be friends with to be friends with somebody is nobody else's effing business but my friends. If I fall backwards, will catch me. Scott Colton, I felt, never would have. My problem was I wanted to bring a guy with me to the top that didn't want to see me at the top. You call it jealousy, you call it envy, whatever the F it is. My relationship with Scott Colton ended long before I paid all of his bills. I have every receipt, I have every invoice, I have every email. I have an email where he says, I agreed to go out separate ways. I will get my own lawyer. You do not have to pay me anymore. That's an email that I have. The only reason the public did not see is because when I finally had to countersue him through discovery, we discovered he shared a bank account with his mother. That's a fact. As soon as we discovered that fact and we subpoenaed old Marsha, he sent the email, oh, can we please drop all of this? It's 2022. I haven't been friends with this guy since at least 2014, late 2013. Now, again, it's very, very interesting, all of what he said there, but he continued. It wasn't the only thing he said. Even if he just stopped there, it would have been wild, but CM Punk was just getting started. He also addressed the executive vice presidents of the company, the Young Bucks, Matt and Nick Jackson, and Kenny Omega, before turning his attention to Hangman Adam Page, and the promo that Page cut prior to Double or Nothing in 2022, just a couple of weeks prior, well, about a month or so prior, a couple of months prior to Punk's comments. He claimed that Hangman went into business for himself and jeopardized the first $1 million live gate for the company. Now, it was originally reported by Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful Select that Punk believed that Hangman went into business for himself, leading to their Double or Nothing match in May, and that Punk may have seen the August 17 promo where he came out, called out Hangman, and obviously in his hometown when he knew Hangman wasn't going to come out, Punk may have seen that as a, quote, receipt for those perceptions of Hangman taking shots at him in May. Quote, the fact that I have to sit up here because we have irresponsible people who call themselves EVPs and couldn't effing manage targets, and they spread lies and bullshit and put into a medium that I got somebody fired when I have F all to do with him, want nothing to do with him, do not care where he works, where he doesn't work, where he eats, where he sleeps. The fact they have to get up here and do this in 2022 is effing embarrassing. If you are at fault, F you. If you're not, I apologize. What did I ever do in this world to deserve an empty-headed effing dumb F like Hangman Adam Page to go out on national television and effing go into business for himself? For what? What did I do? I didn't do a goddamn thing, said Punk. Now, Tony Khan, the AEW president, the owner of the company, the guy who pays the checks for every single person involved here, is sitting right next to the AEW world champion at the time and was squirming and didn't say too much, but when he did, tried to intervene and say that he did his best to make the backstage situation clear. CM Punk said that it is not his business to have to make it clear, repeating that the EVP should have known better because this situation is none of their business. Quote, it is not his, Tony Khan's position to make it clear, Punk said. There are people who call themselves EVPs who should have effing known better. This shit is none of their business. I understand sticking up for your effing friends. I get it. I stuck up for that guy more than anybody. I paid his bills until I didn't, and it was my decision not to. I'm trying to run an effing business, and when somebody who hasn't done a damn thing in this business jeopardizes the first $1 million house that this company has ever drawn off my back and goes on national television and does that, it's a disgrace to this industry. It's a disgrace to this company. We're far beyond apologies. I gave him an effing chance. It did not get handled. You saw what I had to do, which is very regrettable, lowering myself to his effing level. That's where we're at right now. I will still walk up and down this hallway and say, if you have an effing problem with me, take it up with me. Let's effing go. Well, they did. They did take it up with me, and they did effing go. But Furthermore, going back to Punk's comments, CM Punk reiterated that he tried many different avenues to resolve his issues with Scott Colton, but at the end of the day, Colton went ahead with his lawsuit. Quote, "Sorry to keep bringing this up, but I had never spoken a word about it. When it came down that he was going to sue me, I asked to talk to him. He refused. I asked for mediation. It was denied. I offered him money. He said it was not enough. He went ahead with the lawsuit and sued. It's his effing funeral. I don't care. He shares a bank account with his mother, which tells you all you need to know about what kind of character he is." Turning his attention back, though, to the executive vice presidents, whom he never actually said. He never said Kenny Omega. He never said Matt and Nick Jackson. He never said the Young Bucks. He just said the EVPs, which there are 3 of in the company, so you know who they are. CM Punk says that he is doing his best to fill arenas, while the EVPs still think they are in Reseda, California, the longtime home, of course, of PWG, which, of course, the Young Bucks are very famous for their participation in that. I'll tell you why I'm upset about it. If you're an EVP, you don't try to middle your top babyface. Try to get your niche audience that is on the internet to try and hate him for some made-up bullshit rumor. Really pisses me off. Stepping on your own blank, trying to effing make money, sell tickets and fill arenas. These stupid guys think they're in Reseda, said Punk. Punk also addressed Hangman Page, claiming that he is not the one who likes to take advice, rather he is someone who believes in trial and error. CM Punk, a fan of the history, of course, of pro wrestling, believes that that was not very wise to suggest there is nothing to gain from listening to the advice of the veterans around the AEW locker room. Quote, "Our locker room, for all the wisdom and brilliance it has, isn't worth shit when you have an empty-headed idiot who has never done anything in the business do public interviews and say, I don't really take advice. Who the F do you think you are? That's stupid. I'm on a team with Barry Bonds, Mark McGuire, Sammy Sosa, and I don't need to work on my swing. I'm not going to listen to these guys. Effing go F yourself. I dare you to effing say that to Terry Funk's face. I don't need to listen to you, Mr. Funk. I know what I'm doing. Effing grow up." Now, Fightful also are clarifying here. They originally reported the Punk Cabana news earlier this year, which CM Punk clearly was upset by. They say, according to Sean Ross Sapp, whether you believe him or not, that's up to you. But according to Sean Ross Sapp, they've never spoken to Kenny Omega or the Young Bucks outside of interviews. So the allegations that Punk levied towards the 3 EVPs, that the 3 leaked the Cabana Ring of Honor story to the media, is not true, certainly from Fightful's perspective. Now, the Wrestling Observer's Dave Meltzer and Brian Alvarez said the same thing. However, of course, when it comes to Meltzer and Alvarez, they have strong ties to one side of AEW and not the other. They have strong ties to the Young Bucks and Tony Khan, so again, make your own determination on that. Now, the story emerged from talent who were frustrated and under the impression that Punk and Cabana's ill will towards one another cost the well-liked Cabana a job he was enjoying. Tony Khan, the AEW president and CEO, denied that was the reason this past week. Cabana eventually got put on Ring of Honor duty, and Fightful are reporting that Cabana had indicated to Khan before Punk's original return to AEW that he'd likely not be happy working there if Punk was in the company. Now, again, from my perspective, if I'm Tony Khan, I'll say, well, unfortunately, mate, either you like it or you leave, because if you don't like it, you can leave, but CM Punk's coming in because he can make me and this company a lot of money, and no disrespect, but one guy's going to make you a lot more money than the other. Now, as far as the element involving Hangman Adam Page, Fightful are reporting that Hangman wasn't in the building at the time of the scrum after All Out, but the heat from CM Punk's side has gone back since May. There were lines in the promos that Punk believed were taking shots at him unfairly regarding the internal Cabana rumors, and he took exception to them. Before Double or Nothing, it had been widely reported by Fightful that Punk expressed his frustrations to higher-ups in AEW. It was later found out that Hangman avoided answering several questions in media interviews as it pertained to those promos in an effort to help things cool down. So Hangman was aware of Punk's frustrations and decided, I don't want to pour any more gasoline on this fire. Now, upon Punk's return from injury in August, he called out Hangman Page unplanned as a receipt, with this line of thinking being that it was fair to do so because Page was in the building. Now, immediately after the scrum rant, talent had informed Fightful and other outlets that Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks were extremely pissed off with Punk's comments, and this, of course, ended up in the brawl with Punk and Ace Steel. Now, Fightful Select, Sean Ross Sapp had heard prior that at least one of the Young Bucks had been in contact with talent outside of All Elite Wrestling, indicating that many of the rumors heard about CM Punk and that were being reported by CM Punk and the frustration around him were indeed accurate. Some of the media believe the Elite were scheduled for the scrum. It would make sense considering that every single person in that scrum was a winner of a big match at the event. It would logically make sense that the first ever AEW Trios World Champions would be scheduled for the scrum. Of course, they never appeared. An adjustment was made after Punk's portion of it. However, that's not been confirmed, but logically, it makes a lot of sense. Around then, as can be seen in video footage, security went around the scrum area in a hurry. Now, it hasn't been confirmed if this was related to the situation with the ongoing brawl in the locker room at this period of time, but again, this would make a lot of sense. Now, a lot of people at the time, and when we were covering this extensively here on the channel, a lot of people were saying, it's a work, it's a work, it's a work. Clearly, and it's been proven at this point, that's not the case. People are still suspended because of it. Regardless of the situation, it had been widely reported that several talent were very upset with Punk's comments by the time he finished the scrum. So people were already reaching out to the dirt sheets. People were already reaching out to the dirt sheets before Punk was even done. Now, by the time, after the early hours of All Out, after that had happened, word had emerged that CM Punk and Ace Steel and the members of the Elite were involved in a physical confrontation backstage. By the end of the press conference, several talent and media had heard rumors that the incident had indeed happened. After CM Punk's AEW scrum where he buried Colt Cabana, the Young Bucks, Hangman Page and others, he returned backstage where an altercation occurred. The EVPs, Omega and the Bucks, were still in the building, and it was reported that there were numerous people that had to intervene. We now know those people were the likes of Brandon Cutler, Michael Nakazawa, Pat Buck, Christopher Daniels, and others. That's where the details of the situation get foggy because there are certainly conflicting accounts of what actually happened depending on which side you were on. Again, it's been confirmed that Punk's trainer and longtime friend Ace Steel was involved, perhaps more than anyone from a physical perspective. It was eventually confirmed that Nick Jackson ended up getting a chair thrown at him by Steel, leaving him marked up after the fight, possibly with a black eye. Kenny Omega and Steel were also said to have, quote, tussled, with Steel allegedly biting Omega and grabbing him by the hair. All accounts of what's been reported and what's being heard about the altercation involve these elements of the story. PW Insider had noted that Ace Steel's wife was said to have been around caring for Punk's dog Larry. Since then, there have been elements of her presence that haven't been made totally clear. It's also been learned that AEW's chief legal officer Mega Parek was near the situation and was informed by the Elite that they were going to speak with CM Punk, which is something that I had kind of speculated on previously, that why would AEW's chief legal officer be there? From someone myself who has worked in a HR situation before, she was clearly brought as a witness from a legal perspective if something indeed went down, which would make you wonder what the intentions were of the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega going into it. They went into it knowing there was going to be minimum a confrontation, and they wanted a legal officer there to back them up if something were to happen in the future. Now, MJF was also nearby, and Chris Jericho also became aware of the situation as it unfolded and also poked his head in, actually informing Tony Khan during the press conference after his section of it that something had happened. Then, in all, Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks were suspended. Brandon Cutler, Pat Buck, Christopher Daniels, and Michael Nakazawa were all present and were suspended as well. CM Punk and the Elites were, of course, forced to vacate their titles, and Ace Steel's future is unknown. Punk and Steel's punishment were not immediately known. This is what Righteous Reg said, who, of course, was at the scrum at the time, saying, quote, he posted a video, of showing the security guard and all this kind of stuff. A person who was familiar with the situation said, quote, a lot of cursing, a lot of mayhem, a lot of people not being willing to hash it out, said one person familiar with the situation. Of course, the AEW president himself, Tony Khan, was not present for the fight. Instead, he was out in front of the assembled media at the time that it was happening, not that far away, but he didn't know at the time. Now, Fightful are reporting the talent, Fightful are told that the talent that immediately followed Punk had no idea of what he said and what was going on either. Security was called, and there were many people trying to break everything up, with the aforementioned Michael Nakazawa, Pat Buck, Christopher Daniels, and Brandon Cutler being around and later suspended. One person outright said it was a situation of them trying to save lives. Right after the situation, there was a lot of heat on Ace Steel, with one person saying they weren't sure what happened, but that, quote, it couldn't have possibly escalated to somebody hitting someone with a chair, basically saying Steel's reaction was a big overreaction. The argument then continued with a lot of cursing and shouting until the Elite left the area. Fightful have heard from people who are siding with both, saying that Punk's comments prompted the situation, and others saying the Elite shouldn't have approached Punk when he was clearly pissed off and basically engaged with a guy that was certainly at the time looking for a fight. However, the large majority of people seem to think Punk should have been expected to have been approached by it after what he said in front of the media and the wider world. Now, when it comes to people maybe you would expect to be on either side of the thing, Hangman Page and FTR, they'd both left the building by then. FTR posted on Twitter that they were bonding with others in the locker room over a bottle of Woodford Reserve. It would have seemed like they, as well as many others in the locker room who had long left, would have likely not been in any condition to have a gang war situation unfold. MGF, as I mentioned, was nearby but didn't actually participate in anything, and Fightful are told that Chris Jericho appeared at one point to express his dissatisfaction with the fight happening. It was later confirmed by multiple outlets, Fightful, PW Insider, F4W Online, and others, that Ace still bit Kenny Omega, CM Punk threw punches, and that a chair hit Nick Jackson in the eye. However, there are conflicting views on who actually started this entire thing. Some that Fightful spoke to believe that Punk should have expected to have been confronted after the things he said. Another person said that the Young Bucks acted aggressively and approached the locker room in an aggressive manner in what Punk could have construed as the 2-on-1 or with Kenny Omega 3-on-1 attack. Now, Fightful are reporting that the situation went on for about 6 minutes. They were also told by another person high up in the company not to expect to hear much officially from the company due to possible legal ramifications. Fightful had heard back from the Hoffman Estates Police Department, who said, quote, Hoffman Estates Police Department does not have any police reports nor any documentation that the police were requested during AEW All Out event for anything that allegedly occurred backstage. The only police report, or response rather, at the event was regarding a family issue in the audience. Basically meaning no police were called, but that doesn't kind of rule out obviously some legal stuff or possibly other stuff happening in the future. But almost unanimously, the talent that Fightful have spoken to haven't been in favor of the way CM Punk handled things at all during the evening. Even talent that would typically back up Punk either said it's not what they would have done or haven't actually even bothered responding, because if you don't have anything nice to say, right, don't say anything at all. Now, this is when it gets into really eyewitness testimony stuff. Imagine we're Court TV, folks. It might even end up there. But imagine we're Court TV, because this is going to get into eyewitness testimony stuff. You've got one side of things, which is CM Punk and Ace Steel's side of things, and you've got Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks side of things. Two differing sides here and two different perceptions of what happened. Let's start off with CM Punk and Ace Steel. This is what they're saying. Of course, again, chances are the truth lays somewhere in the middle of both of these sides of the story, but this is CM Punk and Ace Steel side of things. Per the Punk Ace Steel side of things, after the scrum, the Young Bucks approached CM Punk's locker room. Punk wasn't answering the door, having been in a long match, bloodied, and finished with an emotional scrum. We also know that he was actually injured. He had a torn triceps at the time too. The Bucks were said to have pounded on the door with claims they kicked the door down. Since then, those detailing the situation softened that stance significantly and indicated that instead they forced their way in. It should be noted that even upon hearing the word the door was kicked down in, it was asked the party who said this if they were sure, and even contacted the Now Arena, did Fightful, to find out if such a thing happened, which they said they hadn't heard of, albeit a week later. They also elaborated and claimed that the reason for this was due to Punk not wanting to talk with them as he was busy getting medical attention, one for the cut and also the other for the triceps. According to those close to Punk and Steel's side of things, Matt Jackson swung first, but he missed, and Punk responded. That stance later changed to saying that they expected Matt Jackson to swing, but Punk did first, which is key there. It's a big difference between Matt Jackson swinging first and then the expectation that he will swing, so Punk did first. Either Matt Jackson did or Punk did. And even those that are saying, oh yeah, Matt Jackson swung first, and now saying, no, CM Punk threw first, which is very similar to what the Elite side of things are. Hold that thought. Now, by that point, Nick Jackson was pretty much taking it in. Omega and Steel then pushed their way into the room. Those sources claim Ace Steel's wife was in the room, which is what Steel had told people set him off and made him go ballistic, throwing chairs and ending up biting someone. The claim made from him was that he was looking out for his wife above anything else. The Steel Punk side say that Steel bit Omega because he thought Omega was attempting to crossface him. In the days that have followed the recalling of the stories, those that have been in touch with CM Punk and Ace Steel have softened their stance that the Young Bucks definitely kicked the door down. Instead, they followed up with the idea that they could have kicked, shouldered, or otherwise forced their way in. They said that kicking the door down was clearly a turn of phrase in that sense and should have been clarified. The stance on Matt Jackson throwing a punch first seemed to change based on which party was telling the story, with one version later saying that Punk expected Matt to throw the punch, as we just talked about. The reason given was that Punk didn't feel like talking to anyone, as he was either getting medical attention or had just been given it to take care of his cut. The side has also varied, and what they've said caused Ace Steel to begin biting and throwing chairs, going from his wife being near to him believing Kenny Omega was attacking CM Punk when he was trying to pull Punk off one of the Young Bucks. From what Fightful has heard, Omega didn't really seem nearly as upset as he was initially, but things got out of hand and he ended up getting bitten. They're also told the fight was a very long altercation and that the talk back and forth did not stop after the brawl. Again, it must be pointed out that this is one side of the story and we're going to get into the other. However, virtually all of the All Elite Wrestling roster that Fightful have at least spoken to believe that if Punk and Steel aren't let go, heavy amends will need to be made. And let's face it, based on Punk's personality in the past, that could be construed as unlikely. Let's get onto the Elite side of things. Again, this is just one side of the story. The truth tends to lie somewhere in between. Several sources close to the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega's side of things say that the Young Bucks went to talk to CM Punk, as he'd outlined they should do if they had a problem. However, Fightful are reporting that they hadn't actually been listening to the scrum and were only notified when someone close to them showed up and told them, visibly upset. So they even hadn't actually heard what Punk said. Someone came up to him and said, CM Punk was talking a lot of shit about you, and he went, right, I'm going to go confront them to find out what he actually said first. Now, they went to find AEW Chief Legal Officer Mega Perek to accompany them, which she did, which is why she was there, which I speculated on, again, from a HR and legal perspective, as a witness if an investigation was later needed to happen, which now we know is needed and is ongoing. The claim was that they opened the door, not kicking it in, claimed by the other side, and before Matt Jackson could say anything, Punk went off and started throwing punches at Matt's head. Nick went to intervene, and Ace Steel threw a chair and hit Nick in the face. The Kenny Omega involvement was said to be him trying to remove Larry, CM Punk's dog, from the situation and help keep him safe because he was barking and going nuts, which a dog would, seeing his owner get into a fight. Now, their side of the story says that once he handed Larry off, he tried to get Ace Steel off Nick Jackson, and Ace Steel bit Omega and pulled his hair. Perhaps the only light-hearted aspect that has been heard is when somebody joked he got bit and someone assumed Larry the dog bit Omega, only to learn it was allegedly the AEW producer Ace Steel. Now, those that Fightful have spoken to say that the bite marks on Omega's left forearm were hard to avoid being seen if Omega was photographed at the time or in the weeks following the situation. They are told it was unmistakable that it was a bite. It's worth noting that his pictures with Kota Ibushi over a week later, Omega's left forearm where the bite was not in the photos. In another video of his trip from Japan, he was wearing a long sleeve. So those pictures we've seen of Kota Ibushi this week, his forearm isn't in it. And the videos, he's wearing a long sleeve, possibly to cover up a bite mark, which is most likely still there if it is indeed true. Or if it's not there, to cover up to say, look, see, it's not there. You have to think of both sides here. Now, they have heard, Fightful, that all sides continued shouting with allegations of legal threats from Punk's side immediately. There were also discussions of several people implying they'd walk out, which all seemed to quickly calm. Again, this is just one side of the confrontation and categorically different than the other side from CM Punk and Ace Steel. Now, let's look at both sides here. At this point, a week later, pretty well all the sides agree that all the mentioned parties were involved. It was also agreed that Punk threw the first punch, which again could be key to Punk possibly being dismissed by All Elite Wrestling in the future. And that Ace Steel did indeed throw a chair and bite Kenny Omega. Omega was seen sporting a disgusting bite mark after. Also, it was agreed that Mega Perek was indeed present, of course, the chief legal officer of All Elite Wrestling. The fallout when it comes to Dynamite. It comes as no surprise based on the content that unfolded on AEW Dynamite on September 7, but there were no explicit mentions of the situation or the parties involved in the brawl or the entire situation. This went for commentary, in promos, on social media, or elsewhere. Those that were spoken to by Fightful believe that this is being done for many reasons, but specifically for potential legal ramifications. The Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, and CM Punk are also no longer advertised for any upcoming shows. One talent believes that considering the nature of the situation and possible legal ramifications, not mentioning anyone on television is a better safe than sorry move, especially considering how much of the crux of the argument in general was about public perception, and referencing any of the parties in any context can contribute to that after the most heated situation in AEW history. It continues. So far, talent haven't been told explicitly what is to become of CM Punk, but most of them that Fightful have spoken to are under the impression that it's all pending an investigation and his injury status. There is still an incredible amount of heat on CM Punk, and would have been based on the scrum regardless. As of that September 7 Dynamite, much of the heat that Fightful are hearing on Punk was just as much about his scrum rant rather than anything else. Again, conflicting stories based on the brawl. The thing that they can confirm did happen and have footage of was his rant, and that is the biggest source of the heat. Punk had long been rubbing the locker room the wrong way, but one source said that blaming him for all of the locker room issues of late was simply not fair, as they had reached an all-time high when Punk was actually gone from the company during his injury. When Fightful spoke to the AEW roster on September 7, many indicated that after the show, there was a much more positive vibe, with one saying it couldn't have been much worse than the chaos of the prior days. The same source said that the situation was out of sight, out of mind for plenty of the roster who just wanted to show up and work. Another talent said the best way for all parties to make up the public embarrassment would be to get over the issues, make money for the company, and highlight other talent along the way. Fightful also told that as of the Tuesday prior to Dynamite on September 7, much of the roster didn't even know what they were going to be allowed to say or if they could address it, and some of their content had to be adjusted accordingly. Most likely those names are the names you would expect, such as MJF, Max Caster, the people that would actually address these sort of things. On Sunday, Fightful had reported that top talent in the company was set to take time off. That, of course, was Jon Moxley. Jon Moxley confirmed that was indeed himself. AEW sources had indicated that they had planned on him being back by the Cincinnati show in October at least, but he ended up staying in to help conduct a talent meeting, add star power to the show, and participate in the title tournament, of course, in which he is in the finals of against Bryan Danielson next week. Let's move on to CM Punk's injury, of course, because CM Punk didn't just get suspended because of his brawl, he's also undergone surgery for a triceps tear. In the days that followed, it was learned that CM Punk had sustained an injury during his all-out match, which ended up being a triceps injury that would require surgery, which he underwent within days of the injury happening. It was confirmed to many people, including Fightful, that it happened on a dive during his match with Jon Moxley, and he could be seen checking on it during the match. He was also icing it with drinks during the controversial scrum. So at the very least, CM Punk wouldn't have been around until 2023 anyway because of the injury. This led to several people that Fightful spoke to saying that any paid suspension would be superficial anyway. They also noted that AEW was in a position where he was injured in their ring before any of that unfolded, so paying him could be an issue. Several sources that Fightful spoke with said that either Punk would need to leave the company, make major amends, or hope time heals those locker room wounds if he hopes to return to a welcoming locker room environment. And as I said before previously, if anything, this blessing for CM Punk is a huge blessing in disguise, because time away could be his best friend right now. If he goes away for 8-9 months, by that time it allows him time to make amends. It allows just time to pass and things to move on and to make amends. Maybe that's the best thing to do. Now, the suspensions for all those involved. We spoke about the producers, and we spoke about some of the aftermath as well. Let's get into that. Chris Jericho was credited by several that Fightful spoke to for stepping up even more so in a leadership role over the past couple of weeks. Multiple sources cited his calm demeanor at the scrum in the middle of all the wildness that was going on, and him speaking at the AEW talent meeting in the weeks prior to All Out, as well as the talent meeting on September 7. Jericho, Bryan Danielson, and Jon Moxley had a well-received talent meeting on September 7 ahead of AEW Dynamite. Wrestlers, managers, referees, and announcers were in attendance and were asked to keep their dirty laundry private, as opposed to the numerous stories that had leaked in the previous weeks. The irony being that even the meeting itself leaked. which always makes me laugh with these kind of stories. The talent that Fightful spoke with said that there wouldn't be an elaborate out of respect for the host, or they wouldn't elaborate even more out of respect for the host, but said it was much more well received than the talent meetings weeks prior. Of course, they had a couple of talent meetings weeks prior to AEW All Out, and we see how well they worked. Moxley and Danielson are already very well liked in the locker room, but Moxley gained praise for skipping his vacation to bail AEW out, and Danielson was said to be a calm, warm presence. There were several wrestlers who were not sure of their creative following AEW Dynamite as a result of this, and plenty had to be alters, as we've been seeing in the recent weeks with championships chaining, tournaments being introduced, etc. There was initially some sympathy as it relates to MJF's return, of course, because what gets overshadowed in all of this is that MJF is back in AEW. But not that much, considering everyone was generally left in the dark regarding MJF's status for months, and said All Out actually mirrored that of Punk winning the title in Vegas and Wardlow beating MJF, but everyone's speaking about MJF because of his antics during that weekend. Those that Fightful spoke to had not heard of any heat between MJF and Punk prior to Punk basically mentioning MJF as one of the stubborn kids he had to work with. Now, ahead of the September 14, this week's edition of Dynamite, Michael Nakazawa, Pat Buck, and Christopher Daniels and Brandon Cutler all had their all-out suspensions lifted after only 1 week. Pat Buck was backstage at Dynamite, while Daniels and Nakazawa were already on a planned trip to Japan, but will now participate in matches for AEW at the Tokyo Game Show. Obviously, Nakazawa and Cutler are close with Omega and the Bucks respectively, but Fightful hasn't heard of from any side that anything malicious happened involving any of the parties that were formally suspended as of right now, and they were deemed to have been simply trying to make an effort to restore order and break up the situation and the fight that was happening. Everyone that Fightful spoke to with knowledge of the situation said they believe the fall was suspended preliminary and for precautionary reasons until the situation became more apparent or squared away or just settled. They had to settle everything. It was a blanket kind of decision by everyone involved. Now, as of right now, at the time of recording, the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, they remain suspended. And as of now, there is no timetable on a return for any of the elites. Omega, who's currently in Japan, he had already had the week off at the moment. CM Punk and Ace Steel, their status is quite uncertain. But Punk is now sidelined with that triceps injury, and Steel was not at Dynamite this week. Omega was originally supposed to work with AEW Games for the Tokyo Game Show, but as a result of his suspension, he did not. He is suspended as a wrestler, but also as an EVP too. He's suspended indefinitely, the same as everyone else, who he cannot participate in promoting the game. He did, though, make his originally planned trip and has been seen with former tag team partner Kota Ibushi. Now, as of this recording right now, once again, AEW has still not officially confirmed suspensions publicly or to the media or to anyone. Now, what about the reaction from the WWE side of things? You must be saying, why would we be talking about WWE in this situation? It's an AEW news video, Owen. Well, because there are several AEW talent and wrestlers who have friends in WWE who have heard a lot about the situation. Telephone, tele-friend, tele-wrestler, right? So the WWE reaction side of things. It caught the attention of wrestlers around the industry, of course. There were numerous WWE talent that reportedly actually reached out to Fightful to get notes of what happened, because who knows better than the dirt sheets? So it's funny when wrestlers slag off the dirt sheets, as it were, but they actually call them themselves to say what's going on. Now, a top WWE star said that they believe that the CM Punk they knew years ago is being highlighted. Another WWE talent said that if it was a work, it was one of the most elaborate works they'd ever seen. A third talent said much of the same. Quote, if this Punk press scrum thing is a work, bravo. Both had contacted Fightful before Raw and said they learned individually it wasn't a work and expressed surprise that it even happened. There was confusion from both those as to why Tony Khan would not comment in the follow-up about Punk bashing the EVPs and not providing clarity regarding the people who launched the company with him. Quote, you can't expect a lot of people here to have a lot of positive things to say about Punk, and I think he's aware of that and has probably come to peace with it, one talent who worked with Punk in the past said. I feel like he's trying to run things there, and it looks like he's doing it. Now, another long-time main eventer told Fightful they considered Punk's actions unprofessional and don't believe he's the company man or leader that he's made himself out to be. That same person who would call Punk, quote, selfish and arrogant. This sentiment was echoed by several people that Fightful spoke to, including some talent that work on set with CM Punk at Fox, of course, when he was part of WWE backstage. Now, a WWE official then said they agreed with Tony Khan that wrestlers not liking each other wasn't bad for wrestling, but said in situations like Punk and the Elites, the power had to be asserted in order to let everybody know this wasn't tolerable. The same official said this kind of thing hadn't happened that recently in WWE, except for select incidents involving the likes of Chris Jericho and Brock Lesnar, because talents previously knew that if they did something like this, they would be gone, and Vince McMahon had fired people in the past for similar situations. Another top name in WWE told Fightful that if the parties didn't put their issues aside and make money with it, then none of them have business talking about drawing houses or losing fans or interest. They have a good show, but this is still the biggest piece of business they've done, and they have to capitalize. The same source pointed to Matt Hardy, Edge, MJF, and Kurt Angle as people who have been willing to do that and accelerated their careers. Again, it must be reiterated that the actual accounts of the Brawl are very he said, she said at the moment, and shouldn't be taken as gospel, and it's very unlikely we'll ever learn indeed what actually happened. We'll only have versions of events. So there you go. That is the timeline of events. I know it's super long. I know we go like 40 minutes, but that's the timeline of everything involved. So hopefully you got a better understanding of what happened there. Let's move on and talk about the other stories in the news today. Speaking of Rampage, last night was Rampage. It was Friday. And it was confirmed last night that we will have a Ring of Honor World Championship match next week on Dynamite Grand Slam. And it's going to be Chris Jericho versus Claudio Castagnoli for the Ring of Honor World Championship. And it must be said, this is a heck of a match. It's something I'm really excited to. Chris Jericho competing for the Ring of Honor World Championship. How great does that sound, to be honest with you? That sounds awesome. I don't think Jericho wins, but also at the same time, Jericho's been doing a couple of jobs recently, right? Obviously, he beat Bryan Danielson at All Out, but then he lost to Danielson this past week. I'm sure he wouldn't have an issue whatsoever in putting over Claudio Castagnoli, but could you imagine Jericho as the Ring of Honor World Champion? I can almost see it. And that would be huge for Ring of Honor if they've got a Ring of Honor TV deal planned, and I don't know if they have. But Jericho Castagnoli next week sounds great. And Jericho's Ring of Honor World Champion, why not? I think why not, to be honest. It'll be huge for Ring of Honor, so why not? It'll be interesting to see if they indeed do that. Another match confirmed for Grand Slam. It's going to be on Rampage Grand Slam next week. Is Eddie Kingston versus Sammy Guevara. Of course, this was the match that was originally planned for All Out, but was cancelled because of Eddie Kingston's suspension. It stemmed from Sammy Guevara doing a promo that actually never aired on Rampage, criticizing Kingston's physical appearance, but by all account, he didn't clear with Kingston. It led to Kingston going backstage and pie-facing Guevara, leading to Kingston being suspended from AEW for a couple of weeks. The match that, of course, never happened in the end, but indeed now will be happening on Rampage Grand Slam, so certainly interesting in that one. And as I just spoke about when it comes to the timeline of events of All Out as well, it goes to show you can put your issues aside and make money. That's what pro wrestling is all about. Another match that is going to be happening at Grand Slam is Darby Allin and Sting versus the House of Black in a no disqualification tag team match. Last night on Rampage saw Brody King appear and put a sleeper hold on Darby Allin on Matt Hardy, and wouldn't let go until Allin and Sting came back out to accept his challenge of a no disqualification tag team match next week. Now, of course, this won't involve Malachi Black, who has seemingly been suspension on the brain, released by AEW. After requesting his release from the company. By all accounts, he was granted a conditional release, basically a condition being you had 4 years left on your contract. For a long period of time, you can't go to work for WWE. So next week, it's going to be the House of Black versus Allin and Sting in a no disqualification tag team match, which should be good, but it does feel like at the moment, doesn't it, when it comes to Darby and Sting, that their importance has lessened, certainly. Another match that will be taking place during Rampage Grand Slam is a Golden Ticket Battle Royal. Yes, this is going to be very interesting, with the winner of this Battle Royal receiving a future title shot at the AEW World Championship at a given date and time. This will include the likes of Hangman Adam Page, Lance Archer, Penta El Zero Miedo, and Jay Lethal, but more are expected to be in the match. It's going to be an interesting situation because you're going to be looking at possibly a situation where you've got MJF holding this casino chip for a World Championship match at some point in the future, and also one of these names, maybe Hangman Page or Jay Lethal or Lance Archer or whoever, also holding a World Championship opportunity at one point, which leads to my theory, as I've mentioned several times, that whilst Bryan Danielson and Jon Moxley is the main event of Dynamite Grand Slam, and one of them will be the new AEW World Champion, I believe leaving Dynamite Grand Slam as the World Champion will be MJF. I believe he will cash in his chip, and that will be the situation, in my opinion. So there you go, guys. That's the latest AEW news. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on all that's going on in AEW right now? It's a jam-packed episode. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Be sure to smash a like on the like button. Be sure to subscribe, bottom right-hand corner, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.